In this video, we'll discuss the two risk assessment instruments, the sex offender risk assessment and the nonviolent risk assessment instrument. The two instruments have two different purposes. The sex offender risk assessment identifies those offenders who are more likely to commit a new crime against a person. The impact on the guidelines, it extends the upper end of the guidelines range. The judge will still have the dual recommendation based on historical sentencing practices, and a risk assessment instrument recommendation. On the risk assessment instrument, the instrument is not completed for adultery, bestiality, prostitution, child pornography, or solicitation of a minor. Guidelines are completed for those offenses, but there is no risk assessment instrument. The factors on the sex offender risk assessment instrument are fairly straightforward, but we identify some factors that are kind of unique. Not regularly employed is scored based on a defendant being unemployed 6 months or more in a 2-year period prior to the date of arrest for the current offense. It is also scored if the defendant had 4 or more different jobs in that same 2-year period. So unemployed 6 months or more, or 4 or more different jobs in that 2-year period. When you're scoring offender's relationship or location of the offense, and it's based on an internet crime, the relationship is always known to victim, and the location is always other. In prior treatment, when you score this factor, you select the treatment that scores the lowest number of points. Note that if the defendant has no prior treatment, the defendant will pick up 4 points. Also note that an evaluation, including a psychosexual evaluation, is scored as treatment on the sex offender risk assessment instrument. For the nonviolent risk assessment, the purpose is to divert low-risk offenders to a less restrictive sentence. The impact on the guidelines, the low end of the range, if they're recommended for an alternative, drops to 0. The judge, again, will still have a dual recommendation, a recommendation based on historical sentencing practices, and a recommendation based on the risk assessment instrument. For the nonviolent risk assessment, you have to answer no to all the ineligibility conditions. If you answer yes to any of those, then the risk assessment does not apply. Again, the factors are fairly straightforward, and the instructions can be found in your guidelines manual or on the mobile manual. One of the unique factors, though, is prior arrest or confinement within the past 12 months. Just note for this factor, you do not score arrests or commitments for misdemeanor traffic offenses. Remember, criminal traffic infractions are not scored anywhere on the guidelines. But for this factor, you're not scoring anything related to an arrest or commitment for a traffic offense. One of the questions that we have with the nonviolent risk assessment is, what is an alternative? An alternative is anything that's less restricted. If the recommendation is prison and the judge gives a jail sentence, that is an alternative. It's more than just CCAP. It can be probation, good behavior, some type of treatment. There is no specific program that is excluded or included because the programs vary by jurisdiction. It's just anything that's less restrictive than the traditional recommendation of the guidelines. Our exercise, if you would answer these two questions. 1, for the factor offender's relationship with victim on the sex offender risk assessment, how are internet relationships scored? The second question, we're asking you to give us an example. Give us an example if the nonviolent risk assessment recommends an alternative. For the answers, text the word risk to 56512. You can download this exercise from our website. If you have questions on this factor or any of the risk assessment factors, give us a call at 804-225-4398. Send us a text or send us an email. Thank you.